Hello and welcome to the new edition of the podcast. You should have been here last week, in which myself, Steve Gribbin, and fellow comedian Paul Ricketts interview the movers and the shakers, the people behind the scenes and people in front of the scenes on the comedy industry. And this week's guest is a wonderful guest, the lovely and fantastic performer, Andrew O'Neill. And they've been in the business now, I think, for well over 20 years. And I think they have two comedy clubs, one in Camden, which is called the Troy Club, which has been running for well over a decade. I think it might be nearly 2 decades. And a relatively new one in Oxford called the Dead Leg Club, which is full of the weird, the wonderful, and the very underused word nowadays, alternative comedy acts. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful stylings of Andrew O'Neill.
Yes, Andrew O'Neill. I just want to say something before he comes on.
Our guest today is Andrew O'Neill, and we could talk about your fantastic comedy career, your appearances on TV, but no. Or even the music and your steampunk desires. But what we're going to talk about is your promoting today, which is, of course, the Troy Club. Mm-hmm. And I only just found out recently about Dead Leg in Oxford.
Yep. Yeah. Over the years, I've run a few different bits and pieces, but the what I'm currently running is the Troy Club, which is London's longest running dedicated alternative comedy night.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow. Beating who?
Well, the thing is, there aren't many other ones. So there's us and there's ACMS and there's alternative as in stylistically experimental. Because alternative was obviously in the late 70s. Alternative cabaret was that kind of alternative to the sort of Bernard Manning the comedians thing, and there was a huge amount of experimentation. And then I think Frank Skinner was the game changer. When Frank Skinner came along, he kind of blokeified stand-up. And also Jeff Green. I think Jeff Green deserves he's kind of an unsung hero and influence. That kind of relationship-based observational comedy. Jeff Green I think he was the first person to do that. And now that's like the template for what nearly everybody does.
He's also one of the best people to do it as well. He's a fantastic comic. I'm absolutely with you, Andrew. He doesn't get enough credit at all.
Absolutely, he's astonishingly good. So with the Troy, I started comedy in 2002, January 2002, and at my third gig, an incredibly charming bloke, came up to me and went, "You're really funny. Come and do my gig." And that person was Mike Belgrave. I don't even know if is Mike still gigging.
No, I think he went into teaching.
Okay.
The opposite way from what normally happens.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, he became a doctor. So my first gig was Laughing Horse. That was then in the Liberties Bar. Is now Camden. What is it?
It's the Camden Head now.
The Camden Head, yeah. The Camden Head in Camden, not to be confused with the Camden Head in Angel, which also has a gig, which is just stupid. My first gig was Laughing Horse. Second gig was downstairs at the King's Head a week later. And my third was in the Purple Turtle in Islington.
Essex Road.
Yeah, I remember the Purple Turtle.
That gig that had you were just next to the door, and people would just come in, and the kids from the estates would, bang on the window and stuff. Anyway, all these formative gigs, and then I think my fourth gig was possibly the Troy Club with Mike Belgrave. So the Troy was it was a proper old school Soho drinking den. And you'd go up 2 flights of stairs. I think the most we could get in that room was about 25 people.
Yeah.
At the height, we'd have people sort of literally on the stairs watching. And it was just sort of magical. There was no microphone. I think to start with, there wasn't even a light. And there'd be about 4 people in there because they'd open early for comedy. And it's one of these things where it was the owner's idea. Mike used to drink there. It's the owner's idea. And so you guys know this. So the owner was really enthusiastic.
Oh yeah,
for a month.
that That has never happened before.
Unprecedented, right? And you know, all of the open spots around that sort of scene did this gig, and it was and then Mike got quickly disillusioned with it within, I think, about 6 months, and he offered it to me. So at this point, I was working at UCL, but I had a mate, Dickie, who I knew from the hardcore punk scene, and he ran the shops at UCL. There's the one underneath Bloomsbury Theatre, and then there's one just up the road. And he was having, and so I was jobless. So I rang him up and said, you know, your shop's being renovated. Do you need any help with that? So I ended up doing that job for 4 years, and it's changed my life in several different ways, which we'll get into because of the connections I made there. And so I took the Troy Club over, and I did two things. The first thing I did was I decided to make it alternative comedy only. So basically kind of weird comedy only, which was the first thing I did that pissed any comedians off. There's that thing, as soon as you put in a distinction, I want this sort of thing, people go, but I thought I was alternative. Oh no.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing I did was so it was a free gig, and I flyered the students. So I had this incredible resource. People would come in the shop. I'd have a flyer on the counter, hand drawn and photocopied. Bit by bit, we started selling out, and we started filling this room, and it was glorious. And we'd have all of the weirdest, maddest acts, and then people like Paul Foot, and
I like the fact that Paul Foot is the least maddest of the acts that you're going to put on.
There is method in Paul's madness.
Yes, there is.
You know, and I would book people who would just get on and be extremely strange. There was a madness to that kind of early 2000s open mic circuit, because the top end of comedy now is so lucrative. And there are so many models for making money from comedy. Back then, I had basically no idea I'd be able to make a living off comedy. It wasn't my intention. I just wanted to do comedy. There seemed to be such a gulf between what I was doing and kind of, I don't know, like Eddie Izzard or whatever. I used to get £25 from the bar per week, and that was my income from that. I used to say there were two reasons why people would overcome the social anxiety of performing comedy. And so for some, it's just the love of it. And for some, they don't have the social anxiety.
Yeah.
And so you get all of these wonderful, neurodiverse weirdos doing stuff that surely they didn't even think was funny.
Hey, Andrew, can you name some of the because I'm really into that stuff, like the Iceman. And the Iceman, I actually saw him at the tunnel, and people sat there and watched him sit on a chair watching a block of ice melt, and it took 15 minutes. And people actually, it's really weird, because now, of course, there would be a riot and people go boo, except it was in the right space, but people just took it because, this is great, we'll just so who can you name? What sort of people did you have there? Can you remember any of them?
Who was Joel Elnor?
Oh my God! Yeah, brilliant.
Now Joel Elnor,
I don't know who he is.
He is the brother of a woman who used to be on Dragon's Den.
Yeah,
she was the woman who came up with Red Letter Days. Yeah, so she was an entrepreneur. There's a watershed in comedy. There's autism awareness and there's post-autism awareness, right? John must be autistic, but I booked him, and I sort of said, I'm going to be honest with you. I think people laugh at you. Oh, okay. And I said, if you're happy being booked on the basis that I think you're funny, but I don't think you know why. Because I thought he was really funny.
Yeah.
A typical Joel Elnor joke would be, celebrity, get me out of here. Or more like, celebrity, get me in here. and then you get this like a pause and then a massive laugh. And he would do sort of topical stuff. It was kind of hilarious. He did an hour-long show at the Fringe, and it kind of became a sort of a bit of a cult classic. I think there may have been some bullying involved if people go back. But then he sort of he started he adopted like a female persona. There's a big link between autism and gender dysphoria, and so he would just turn up in a sort of female persona, and yeah, he was sort of kind of almost magically strange, and I think his rich sister kind of looked after him, and
what's happened to him?
He stopped doing it. I don't know why. I ran a club. It was a little bit after you started booking the same sort of acts.
Yeah, right.
For exactly the same sort of reason.
Just the madness, bringing in the madness. Yeah.
So I was going to run a few past you, which I booked and you might have booked.
Yes, please.
There was a bloke called Bry Nylon.
Yes. This is like, do you know what this is like? This is the equivalent for us of those, like, I love the 70s shows. There are neural networks in the back of our brains that have been gathering dust that are lighting up for the first time since 2004.
Yeah. Oh,
right,
God.
Nylon, yes, absolutely. Right, yeah. What was his act?
His act was he'd come on, he's from Manchester, and he'd have tights on his legs, and he had the really, really bad varicose veins in one leg, so his leg was misshapen. But he'd also come on with a pair of tights over his head. And he'd come on stage and he'd open this little briefcase, take out his shrunken head, hold it up to the audience and go, I never did it. I never did it.
Absolutely, yeah. He was stunning.
Oh, God.
I'm so terrible with names. There was an act from Manchester. It was a double act. I can't remember what they were fucking called. Should have written some of this down before I started. And they the Mike Oldfield song Portsmouth. They would play that while playing while blowing through a glittery paper tube, and it was absolutely hilarious. And I've since asked, can I use that song in something, because it's a perfect song for doing something like that. Well, one of them was Richard Swan. Richard Swan would he'd do a joke, so his whole it is really deadpan and really monotone. Some of the best jokes I've ever heard. I used to work in a car park. When there was a fire drill, we had to assemble where we already were. And then he'd raise his arm and go, in between each joke, right? And this sort of absolute wonderful. I mean, Anthony Miller, who, again, autism awareness makes the world a kinder place. Auntie used to do kind of poems and stuff. There was Sean Ridgway. He would do. He was a sort of poet. Just basically anyone who kind of. I mean, Alexis Dubas. This was interesting because Alexis was early on. Alexis hadn't found his voice, and he would try all these different sorts of things. He came in as a Mexican once, and it's really interesting watching him try these different things. He did, and he had jokes that just never really worked. So he'd say the name of his town, and so I came to London where the streets are paved, and it wouldn't get a laugh. But when he does Marcel Lucon, where the streets are paved, it's suddenly that thing of like. Yeah. The punchline is that he hasn't finished the sentence. That elevates it. To me, there's something really punk. And I talk about this at Dead Leg, actually. There's something really, really punk about anyone can get up and try something. They've got this space. They've got this 5 minutes. You can get up and you can try something. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. But they're expressing something of themselves. Yeah. And that playground and that sand pit and that kind of room for experimentation, I think has largely lost. It's largely moved away from the open mic circuit because people have their eye on the prize. I mean, this is classic veteran comic moaning, but open spot comics don't stay and watch the headliner anymore. No, because they've got access to so much comedy online. They don't think they need to, which perhaps they don't. But also, there are people who headline club gigs that you don't get to see on TV or on Netflix specials. So yeah, it was absolutely gorgeous. But then we started hitting issues where the grumpy Polish guy who would open up for us would get there later and later. And so we would end up with a queue of 30 people outside the door, and sometimes he just wouldn't turn up every now and then. And I didn't have a mobile phone at the time. I was against mobile phones. I didn't have a mobile. I ended up having to get one to run this gig properly. But at this point, so he couldn't call me and tell me he was late. So we were just there waiting, and we ended up. Sometimes we'd have to do it down. So there was a Spanish restaurant, like a tapas restaurant downstairs.
Yeah.
Occasionally we go, can we just come in and do it here? So we do that. In fact, the first ever one was there. I'm trying to remember who was on. It was who was that Canadian guy? Alex
Lazarev. I used to play poker with him because for a comedian, he had absolutely no sense of humour.
Absolutely.
And I'd wait until I got a hand, and then I'd say things to him like, how'd it go tonight then, Alex? And he'd be really no way, it didn't go that great. What, did you die? Did you die? And then next thing you know, he'd be paying anything to see my hand.
Right. That's perfect. He had no sort of sense. He had this really mad thing where he'd go, oh, the thing is, you English people, you say things like, it's people like you what cause unrest. And I was like, no, that's a character in a Monty Python sketch. That's where he's got it from the bee license, the fish license sketch.
Yeah.
I would like to buy a fish license, and it's people like you what cause unrest. And it's the same character that's in the Parrot Shop sketch. It's that John Cleese character. And I was like, but what you've done is you've taken something from a Monty Python sketch and you've used that as observational comedy. To tell British people what they're like. So his parents were millionaires, and I think they both died like a plane crash or something. And then he spunked his inheritance on, like fast cars and coke and girls. And then he wanted to be a comic, so he would come over, but without a visa. So then he'd get deported, and then he'd come back through Ireland. He was an intense guy, and then he, having got nowhere in comedy, he then he became like one of those like dating gurus that propose or encourage things like negging. So you tell a beautiful woman that she's an idiot and she's got shit shoes and she falls in love with you.
Yeah, the rules.
And he's like,
exactly,
so he does all these YouTube videos and he's got. Yeah, he's you kind of go, yeah, that suits you better. A guru of misogyny. That because I actually, he was the first person I said I'm not going to book you again because I think your stuff's, I think it's sexist, and he had stuff about lesbians and stuff. And I thought it was sexist, and I thought it was. There's a lot of comedy that kind of diminishes lesbian identity. Why wasn't I there? Because they're lesbians, and so I was like, yeah, I don't, and he, he got that with me. There you go. People get that with me quite a bit. So we got to the point where basically this guy was turning up later and later, and we ended up doing the show outside. And we ended up, and I thought we need to move on from this. So this would have been a couple of years, and we had an awful lot of people came through that door, and it was really magical. And it's a really, like my probably the happiest I've ever been was when I quit my next day job. So the last day job I had was working at the Cabinet War Rooms and Churchill Museum. And I quit that job and I didn't really have anywhere to live and I didn't really have anything. I wasn't making money off comedy, but I didn't want to sell the hours of my day. That was this thing. There was this kind of anarchist situationist notion that my life is finite. And I had so little money, it would be like, can I, at the end of, after a gig, can I afford some instant noodles and a can of beer? And that's like a good night. And I don't think I've been as happy since, of just doing as many gigs as I can do, like completely dedicating myself to comedy. And then we moved to Turnmills, the super club in Clerkenwell.
Oh my God. I never knew you were there. Turnmills. I once did one of the worst gigs of my life there. Not during that club, but it was one of those classic comedy should never be in a nightclub gigs, and everybody died. The sound was terrible. The audience were just chucking. Oh, I'm getting PTSD just thinking about it. Horrible.
Well, something came out of the Troy Club. So there were these two women that most of my audience were students at UCL. And so, yeah, it's a smart audience. And these two women used to come. They would come every week to the Troy, and they said, "We really love what you do. We're having a party for the Slovakian Society." It was at LSE. Do you remember the Chuckle Club at the LSE, right?
Yeah,
That was
I do. Yeah,
gorgeous
Fantastic.
gig, right? So I'm thinking, oh, it'd be like that. oh no. So the fee was £100, and that was £70 more than I could imagine being. I think I used to get 30 quid occasionally from Roddy Fraser. We'll talk about Roddy in a bit. And so I did this gig. Now, bear in mind, with inflation, that's actually probably what I'm getting paid now.
Yeah.
We really like your comedy. Come and do this. We're having a party for the Slovakian Society. We'd love you to come and do comedy. It'll be £100. Superb. So I get to this room in LSE, and so the lighting is just kind of like dim green flashy lights, right? So you can't see anyone's facial expression. The room is just the bar in the Student Union. It's vast. I mean, I'll probably go back, and it was probably the size of this room, but it seemed like a bar. It's a barn will never fill it, right? It was not exclusively the Slovakian Society by any means. That was about 10 people on one table. So there would have been about 100 people, and it was a £1 a pint night.
Oh my God.
So they've just hijacked, the classic thing, you hate it when you go for a night out and someone builds a comedy club around you, that's what had happened. And this bloke went up and said, right, okay, so it's the Slovakian Society, Christmas do, whatever it was. I'm going to do the raffle now. Hello, and just like he's getting nowhere with the right. So that was green 33, green. Hello, anyone? Green. So, right, we'll come back to that one. So the raffle is dying. Boo! Right, the raffle got its first short review that day as well. It was a nightmare, right? So the raffle finally got its fucking adjective in time out, right?
Yeah.
So the raffle dies on its arse. He then goes, and now it's comedy, Andrew O'Neill. So I walk on this stage, and I went, right, and I'm surprised this early on in my career I had the presence of mind to do this. But I said, hello, I'm about to do 20 minutes of stand-up comedy. If you're not interested, please turn your back on me now. So some people turn their back on me. I start doing my skits and my routines, and to just nothing, right? Nothing. A couple of people over here are laughing, right? But it's horrible. And I just kept going, I'm going to do 20 minutes. People started heckling me. And then a guy got a chair. He pulled it up in front of the stage, and he had a sleeve of plastic pint pots, and he started throwing them at me one by one. And I went, I've still got 5 minutes. So I ended up doing my set, kicking the pint pots like back into the crowd, and just kind of going, these guys, I've got 5, and I did my 20 minutes, and it was just, and I was like, well, that was. That went as well as it could have done. And then, when things, if you wrote this, it would be unrealistic. You go, that's a step too far. He was at the bar drinking a pint, and I went up to him, and he's wearing a beanie, and I just pulled his hat off, and he turned around and threw his pint over me.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So I went home with 100 quid. And felt like a professional. So the one at Turnmills, it was exactly that same situation where they said, great, we'll give you a budget, and we'll put posters everywhere, and we'll promote it. We get thousands of people through the door. And then, we did it. I maybe did it for a few months, and it was just one of those things where you just go, right, it's a shit location. There's no passing trade. It's the wrong time of day. It's the wrong day of the week. We're not getting anything from these clubs. The few people who are in there aren't really interested. So then we needed a new home. So the first ever Troy club that I ran was on the 10th of September, 2002.
Wow.
Mike Belgrave, Stephen Carlin. I mean, this is before my Weirdos Only policy. And I think this might be after, because Anthony Miller, Phil Klein, Phil Zimmerman, For listeners at home, Phil would Phil looked like a bird, and he would come and go pigeons, 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 pigeons in my loft, and he had a like it's really funny. He had a couple of really.
He's got in and out, in and out. They don't even notice. In and out.
But that's that like absolute kind of that absolute like that's like a raw. He hasn't sat down and thought, if I do that, it'll be funny. No. That's just emerged from him.
Yeah.
Dizzy High. Dizzy's still doing gigs, I think.
Yeah.
And look, all hail and all bow down to the absolute legend that is Jimbo.
Yes. I was going to mention Jimbo because
yes,
has to be in there.
Again, I mean, you know, do you remember that point when Jimbo's wife died and then it looked like he regenerated?
Like Doctor Who.
Yeah. No, because he literally because his wife died, and for somehow he came into money. I don't know if she had life insurance or something, and he dyed his hair silver, or flashy suit and kind of pointy, shiny shoes, and he used to wear just like a jumper, didn't he? But you know, again, Jimbo had like a sort of verbal tick of kind of shout laughing at his own jokes, and he would. I don't think I ever saw him do the same thing twice.
No, I never have. I've gigged with him recently.
Right.
I'll say this to the listeners. So we're talking about a legend of the comedy circuit because you never would have heard of him because he's never made it. He's been an open spot for something like 40 or could even be 50 years.
Yeah.
He was definitely going in the mid-80s. I remember him from then. Yeah. Paul, have you got that amazing story about him when he cycled to the gig in the snow?
No, he hitchhiked.
Yeah, go on, you tell this story. It's great.
I had to check with Jimbo that this was true, and it turns out it's absolutely true.
Right.
So there's a comedy competition in Manchester, and he thinks, well, I'll go for that. And he hitchhikes all the way to Manchester.
In a snowstorm.
Yeah. So, unbeknownst to him, the gig gets cancelled because all the acts from the Northwest said, we can't travel in this snowstorm. And the promoter is trying to phone him, but he hasn't got a phone. God. And so he's going, oh my God, I'll have to go to the venue and wait for this bloke to turn up. Jimbo turns up at the venue, he makes it. And the bloke goes, oh, God, I can't believe you've made it. You've come all the way here from London. Go, I've hitchhiked. Wow, he said, look, there's £100 prize and a little trophy. I'm just going to give it to you.
Amazing.
Just for just doing what you've done. And local acts didn't made it. You've made it. And Jimbo goes, well, can I just do my set in front of you then? Does his set, the bloke goes, give me that money and the trophy back.
That is absolutely fucking sorry. You're not having that. Come here, get off.
And that is who I booked for the Troy Club. Paul Schuff. Do you remember him?
No.
He used to do material about being bitten by a radioactive cathedral. He was wonderful. Jem Brooks. Hey, good stuff. Jem Brooks, he gave up being a vet to do stand-up. And occasionally, while having a very hard gig, which happened a lot, there was a look in his eye of, I gave up comedy. I gave up being a vet to do this. Me and Stephen Carlin do an impression because good stuff. He's got sort of like this tragic figure with this kind of chirpy exterior, like this false chirpy exterior. He was and a very red face.
Well, that's due to the drinking. Before I even did comedy, because I used to drink in certain places.
Yeah,
I'd meet comics, and he was the first one I met. And I thought, my God, you're the saddest person in here. And I said, what do you do? I'm a comedian.
It's like the ghost of Christmas Future, wasn't he?
That's good. Did you tell him that he looks sad? He should go and see the comedian Jem Brooks. Roddy Fraser. Now,
Yeah.
Yeah, you were going to talk about him, weren't you?
Roddy Fraser used to run comedy upstairs at the Bathhouse. The Bathhouse was the next location for the Troy Club. So this is on Dean Street. It was knocked down for Crossrail. Roddy Fraser was a very angry Scotsman.
Canadian Scotsman.
Was he Canadian Scotsman?
Yeah. If you talk to the Canadian comics, he was doing comedy. He started in Canada first.
I didn't know that. Wow. And and occasionally he would have some really good gigs, and occasionally he wouldn't, and then he would shout at the audience to tell them they're wrong.
There was a guy that used to come down to the tunnel all the time. I think I've told Paul about this. And he was a black guy, and he was like a Jamaican guy, and he used to do these poems. And one of the poems that he used to do, but he used to come on, and all he was wearing was like a loincloth. And he would be carrying a spear. Right?
Oh, my God.
And he had a poem called There's an Uprising Down Below. And as he said... As he said it, he started to get an erection.
Oh my God.
It's one of the weirdest, but he was down there nearly every week, and he used to get booed off every single week. As soon as he said, there's an uprising down below, and then looked at his loincloth, and it's just doing this.
Just on demand.
I don't know. How the hell did he did it? I don't know. But it's... And we could talk about this as one of the things. I mean, you did mention it, the homogenization of comedy, because in the early days, a lot of the circuit was like this, like in the early 80s when I started. It was all a complete mixture of poets. There was, I mean, Cast New Variety used to have some weird people on. And it was all mixed together, special acts as they used to call them.
Yeah.
And I mean, Mark Steele's got a brilliant bit in that book, and he said, and to add to your thing of why people do comedy, he said that people do it because they love it, but also there's some people who do it because they have to do it.
Yes.
There's no other outlet for what's inside their heads, and it has to be on the stage.
Yeah.
And where I think you're dead right, it started to change when it became when money got involved, basically, as well.
Yeah.
So people would lose patience if you had like 3 acts and the compare, and if they didn't like one act, then they start getting a bit pissy because they spent £2. And then so those acts got filtered out. But it seems to me that what you're doing with the Troy Club is trying to recapture that spirit and doing it, really successfully.
And also, I mean, I've gigged a lot with Norman Lovett. I toured with him, and Norman talks about how the Comedy Store moved twice, basically, and with each move, they got rid of the weirdest acts.
Yeah,
and you could just see, and the way their booking policy just doesn't fucking relate to what they bang on about when they talk about the legacy of the Comedy Store. It's really interesting, and that thing of what people are doing on stage is an expression of something that's directly part of them. So we moved to the Bathhouse, and we had some really good gigs, and then I started booking people like Simon Munnery, and Russell Brand started doing that one, and I got Stuart Lee because that was when Stuart started coming back, and so this wonderful, wonderful thing where I went from booking, but also booking all these other people, and I started being able to do previous lineups include. Then we moved to the Crowbar. So the owners of the Crowbar said, we hear you do comedy. We don't normally open on a Sunday. Do you want to come and do Sundays with us? It was a really nice period where there were a load of people that we could get for the money, and metalheads, and we could do some really dark material because the metalheads enjoyed that. And then occasionally a metal band who'd done a show around the corner would come in. So at one point Neurosis walked in, and I was like, fuck, Neurosis are at the back of my gig. This is incredible. But again, with the annoying thing with the Crowbar was there's 2 owners. One's into the idea, one isn't into the idea. And the one who wasn't into the idea was the one who was running it on that day. So it's Steve and Rich, right? And Rich was really friendly, and Steve was he was one of those people because he ran a really cool bar that all touring bands would come and drink in. He was like the center of attention, and he had that kind of social credit.
Yeah.
So this is really frustrating thing where So the other thing with the Crowbar, late night bar, if you're a regular, you get in for free. They just nod you in, and they formalised it eventually with it, because I've still got my Crowbar card over there, and but you just get the nod from the security guy because he knows who you are, right? Then the security guys would change, and it would take a few weeks for you to be nodded through again. I said to Steve, so we're going to charge, it's like a £5. We're going to charge on the door. Can you give me a list of people who get in for free? And he said, just the people who work here, all them, and my girlfriend. And I said, are you sure? Because people are going to expect to get in for free. Because anyway, no, honestly. So day one, Stevie's on the door. Someone comes in and goes, oh, we're just here for a drink. Oh, it's comedy tonight. No, I'm just here for a drink. Yeah, but it's £5 in. Steve? And she goes, oh, yeah, they can come in. And so,
God.
So, and how undermining is that, right? So, and the Crowbar was it's like a really long, thin bar, and then like an opened up room at the end, and we were at the end. What ended up happening is you'd have about 10, 15, 20 people at the bar who weren't there for the comedy, who'd got in because they know Steve, talking really, really loudly, would not be shushed, and then trying to do comedy at the front. So, unless it was really packed at the front, it just stopped working. And you just go, right. So that was the Crowbar. And we had some really, really good nights there. We had some names in and that sort of thing. And then we moved to Aces and Eights in
North
Tufnell
London.
Park. Yeah, because I used to live just around the corner from there. We were there for a good few years. And now we are back in what feels much more like a spiritual home at the Black Heart in Camden. We've actually just moved. We've done one. We did one last month, and we're doing one again this week. And the Black Heart is a metal bar in Camden. It's got a perfect performance space. It's a band room. We have a proper tech, and I'm still booking. So Sami Abu Warda is headlining, and he's Bedouin. He's a clown, and he's incredibly funny, like proper, proper gut-bustingly funny. And I now run it with my friend Leslie Ewing Burgess, who's a Canadian comic, another kind of weirdo outsider artist. So yeah, for the last few years we've been running it together.
I mean, how do you find the act? I mean, do you go out and seek the acts, or do you let people come to you? How are you sort of, like a football scout, as it were? Do you see people and think, wow, they'd be absolutely perfect for the club?
If I see anyone, partly because I also run I run Dead Leg in Oxford.
Oh yeah.
So for a while I ran that in Camden for a bit, and the idea, what I've completely failed to get is I wanted a rowdy gig. So I tell the audience, if you don't like it, you can heckle, and they just don't. And I tell them that amazing heckle from the Tunnel Club, which is, a bloke goes up and goes, his open line is, I'm schizophrenic, and the bloke shouts out, you can both fuck off. But so basically, if anyone is weird enough to do the Troy, I just go, right, and good enough as well. Then yeah, so I mean, we book between 6 and 10 acts a week at Dead Leg, so I just do it like that, and then and Stuart Lee's going to do it in September, so I'm still booking. I'm still kind of getting some of those names. And yeah, just anyone who has that alternative spirit, and sometimes there are people who are stylistically quite straightforward, but they're weird. And yeah, just anyone who, and I'm sure you guys are the same. We've been doing this a long time. It's not easy to make a comedian laugh.
No.
And I can be watching an act, and I can think they're great, and I'm just going, yep, oh, you've done that, and there's the thing. And then also, people can be storming with material. You kind of go, surely, my dad could have come up with that joke,
Yeah.
But it's when people do something unexpected, or it's that thing that kind of comes from the heart, like with these acts who they couldn't not do it, and they couldn't express themselves in any other way.
Yeah.
So we've been running since 2002. So I do a weekly gig now here called Dead Leg Comedy, and it's my favourite part of the week. So we are a house band. So me on guitar, Nate Kitch on drums, Jamie Michaela on bass, and a guy called Vincent Lynch, who also plays bass for songs that Jamie can't play because she's just learning. And we do a few songs at the top, we've now got a repertoire of 30 songs. We do a few songs at the top, a cover, and then I MC, a couple of acts, and then we have the open spot section. Everyone does 5 minutes, and we stay on stage. And we will interject and we will add jokes. And sometimes if someone's doing something rhythmic, we'll just start playing quietly underneath. So we play them on and we play them off. And sometimes we use Rumble by Link Ray. Sometimes we use Shaken All Over, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. So, so please welcome to the stage, blah, blah, blah. And then after the show, after the comedy's finished, and then we have like a headline act or whatever else. And then we just have a jam. It's just incredibly good fun. And an actor who was on last week was just like, if there's a heaven, it's this gig. We're like, fuck, okay. We didn't know it was that good.
Wow.
And it's free. It's free. And we do a collection. So it's in a brewery. So it's called the Tap Social, and it's in West Oxford. And so it's a brewery bar. They put a curtain in the middle, and there's a good stage. And yeah, we're slowly building. I reckon it takes 2 years to build a comedy club.
So what's the audience like? Is there a difference between your audience in Camden and the one in Oxford?
Yeah, the Troy Club is a dedicated comedy audience, and they're like, a lot of them are sort of people who've been fans of mine, and then they find the gig, and then they, it's a proper. Whereas it's, we had about 30 in last night, I think. Students. There was a couple of mums, just on there like this. Like there was a mum it was her first night out after giving birth, so a 6-month-old kid, and that's her first proper night out. They loved it, and they were like, "We didn't think it would be this good." And the thing is, the kind of production values of having a band on stage, and particularly having a drum kit, particularly having live drums, and people just go, "This is really cool," and. So there, it's varied, and I love the idea of encouraging a sort of rowdy gig, but it's Oxford, so really polite, and we've got like good support from really good support from the venue, which we also have at the Black Heart. Black Heart were trying to get the Troy Club for ages. So I feel we're in a good place, and then that gig feeds into the Troy Club. So it's a nice little ecosystem. So the policy with the Troy Club is we aim for diversity. We aim to have at least one non-white act and at least one woman, in addition to Leslie and me being non-binary. And there's an interesting thing, I think, with people of colour and experimental comedy. And I've spoken to a bunch of acts about this over the years. And there are very few people, ethnic minority acts, who do experimental comedy. And a few people have sort of said to me, well, there can be an element of, but if you're anticipating people being against you because people are fucking racist, right? And it's, we live in quite a racist fucking country. If you're also then stylistically weird, you've got two things to kind of overcome. And my gender stuff was something I used to consider it cross-dressing. I didn't cross-dress on stage for a couple of years because I didn't want that to be something I had to kind of get past. I mean, no one gives a shit about gender anymore. I could do a set in a dress and not even mention it, and it doesn't matter anymore. But it's quite difficult programming the Troy with people, particularly headliners, partly because anyone who's good enough and is a person of color and is weird tend to launch into beyond our budget. It's an interesting thing, but with Dead Leg, my policy is I book everyone in the order in which they email me. And then diversity just takes care of itself. I do comedy for a living. That's an absolute privilege. What an incredible life.
Because that's a nice upbeat finish. I'm going to just tack the end on and say thank you for speaking to us.
And thank you very much for having me. What a delight.
Thank you.
So that was Andrew O'Neill, who was discussing some very weird and much missed weirdo acts that used to grace the circuit, which none of you will probably have any memory of.
No. And I hope people are intrigued to look up people like the Brixton bank manager.
Yeah.
Although I don't know whether there'll be any record of him anywhere. There might be. I don't know.
I'll explain why there's been such a gap between this and the last podcast / video YouTube offering, and that's because illness. I think you were ill to begin with, and then I topped you by being iller.
Yeah, well, I only had the common or garden flu for about a week, but you had a severe chest infection.
Took a bit of time out, and as soon as that happens, of course, you get behind. But we'll be back to our fortnightly schedule in future. So, as we always say, if you've enjoyed this particular offering, please tell all your friends, like, subscribe, or all the stuff you're supposed to do, share, anything else. I always say this every time because I can't remember all the things I'm supposed to say.
Share, subscribe, like. They're the three ones that go share, subscribe, like. What's put into a little rap? I can't think of anything else.
Thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up. Yeah, and also, that thing about telling your friends and spreading it by word of mouth is a good one as well. If you like.
I don't even think you have to stick to word of mouth. You could send an email. You could even use semaphore. I don't particularly care.
Yeah. What about scrawling it on the outside of somebody's house?
Tattoos. I'm wanting something.
That's a good one. Yeah.
On the face.
How about one of those planes that flies over football grounds?
Oh, what with the little sign behind?
I love you, Terry. Don't forget to listen to the podcast. You should have been here last week.
So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. And so whatever you're doing in the next fortnight, enjoy it. And then we'll see you later on at the next one.
Goodbye.
Bye.
They said you should have been in last.